All right, mujeres y hombres, my goal is to keep it under 10 minutes, which is going to be hard because I love talking about, thinking about, arguing about our government and the way it's set up. It's hard to imagine that something 300 years old that was invented before people had refrigerators or showers, it's still around today. And we still use it to deal with drones, the internet, terrorism, all kinds of things. It's pretty impressive, right? Now, the challenging thing about our government is that just like you, it can be defined in lots of different ways. So this vocabulary is mostly about ways to describe our government. And there's lots of different ways to describe it. So the first one is probably the easiest one. Our government is a democracy. Probably you could fill this one on your own, fill this one in on your own. A democracy is a government type in which citizens have the right to vote. Citizens have the right to vote. So it's basic. It's important, though, because there are still lots of countries in the world where that is not how decisions get made. China, North Korea, even you could argue Russia doesn't have true democracy. Now, it's also true the United States didn't have true democracy for a long time. For a long time, the only people who could vote were white men. For a while, not even all white men could vote. Needed to be wealthy white men. And for a long time in our nation's history, racist white people took the right to vote away from people of color to try to limit their power. It's a classic way in a democracy to limit people's power, is not let them vote so they don't have a voice. So today it's very controversial on how people register to vote, how hard it should be for people to register to vote, and it's something that Americans go back and forth on a lot. But a democracy is one way to describe our government, which means in our government, people have the right to vote. These next two words are very similar and make things a little bit confusing. But this first one is very simple. You understand this. We have a national government. We have a government that's in charge of the whole country. We also, and here's the hard part, we also call that government a federal government. That's confusing. The national government, federal government, same thing, two different words. It's the government that's responsible for the citizens of the whole country, as opposed to a state government, which is just responsible for the people in a particular state. So when we say the national government, we mean the government of the United States of America. When we say the federal government, we mean the exact same thing. Here's where it gets kind of confusing, is that idea of a federal government, meaning the national government, but we also have federalism, which is slightly different. Our government can be described as a federalism-styled government, and what that means is we have a government that splits power between a national government and a state government. Another way to say that is we split power between a federal government and a state government. Whew, that's confusing. The federal government is the national government, but federalism means that we have a federal government and we have state governments. That's why we have a president, Donald Trump, who's in charge of the federal government, the whole national government. But we also have this guy, the governor of the state of Minnesota. His name is Tim Walz. Why do I like to bring up Tim Walz? One, he's got a good first name. Two, before he became a politician, he was a high school social studies teacher. And he coached high school football. Tim, high school teacher, high school football coach. Maybe later on in life, I'll have a different job. Now, the reason I put marijuana up here, first of all, it's important to note that any drug in a teenage brain or even an early 20s person brain is going to be hard on that brain because the brain is still developing. We know marijuana is a drug. We also know that anybody that says marijuana isn't harmful isn't using evidence because it's illegal in the United States to test marijuana to see if it is harmful. So we don't really have very many studies yet on the effects of marijuana on anyone's brain. However, it is true that in some states, Colorado and California, for example, where it's legal to sell recreational marijuana to adults. Now, the reason that's a good example of federalism is actually Donald Trump could shut down all of those places with a snap of his fingers. because there's a federal law that says that any marijuana purchase in America is illegal. That's true. It's illegal to sell marijuana or buy marijuana anywhere in the United States, period. But both Barack Obama and Donald Trump have decided to allow these individual states, because we have a federal government, allow them to try this out to see how it works and then decide if it's okay moving forward. Another example is the state of Montana for a while had no speed limits on its freeways. Didn't change the law in Minnesota, but for a while, until they realized it was super dangerous, you could speed any limit, go any speed in Montana. Another example or another way to describe our government is to say we have a republic. Yes, we have a democracy. Yes, we have a federal system. We also have a republic. And all you have to do is look at the news on any day of the week. There are issues about terrorism, issues about taxes, issues about healthcare, issues about on and on and on. And what we've decided in our country is there's no way that us, regular people, can keep track of all those things. So in a republic, we choose a representative to go and decide these things for us. For example, in the United States right now, Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar are our senators. That is, the state of Minnesota has voted for those two women to go to Washington, D.C. and decide these laws. A republic is a government where people vote for representatives who make decisions for everybody. Most of the time, individual people don't vote on issues or laws. Gun control is an interesting example of that. Right now, if every person in America were to vote on a straightforward gun control, not getting rid of people's rights to buy guns, not certain kinds of guns, but just a basic thing like a background check. If everyone in America were to vote on a law that said before you buy a gun anywhere, you should look into your criminal background and your mental health background. Most Americans, whether they own guns or not, agree that seems like a good idea. Don't let just anybody buy a gun. But our representatives right now aren't passing those laws, even though most Americans agree on it. So that's an example of how we have a republic, and that's not usually how a republic is supposed to work. If most people want something, the representatives usually are supposed to follow suit. The rest of these are just kind of simple, straightforward definitions. A constitution is a blueprint. This is a blueprint on how to build an X-wing fighter plane. A blueprint or a rules or a direction on how to build a government. The Constitution, which starts like this, we the people of the United States, doesn't actually set up any laws. It just says how to set up laws, and when you set up laws, what to do about it. The Declaration of Independence is different from the Constitution because it just said we declare independence. That's it. It didn't set up any laws. It didn't even say what kind of government. It just said we are independent. That's a constitution, is the blueprint, how to set it up. Oh, bummer. This cute little thing just can't quite do it. And the same is true for the founders, the patriots. Their first attempt at a government was an absolute failure. It had one success. I put that in parentheses because Native Americans and others might say, actually, the Land Ordinance of 1785 just made it easier to take over Native American land. But that was the one law that they wrote that was successful in what its goal was. Otherwise, the Articles of Confederation, the first pyramid that we talked about in class, that the Patriots came up with, was a failure. It was so weak, it nearly started another revolution. There were farmers ready to go to war again because they were so upset at the government. Now, there were two things that the national government couldn't do under the Articles of Confederation. I want you to look on page 137 and find out what are two of those weaknesses. We talked about one in class. One of the weaknesses is in order to change the Articles of Confederation, you needed 100% of the states to agree with you. That's really hard to do. You can see right now I'm going to be over my 10-minute mark, but you can tell that I'm really interested in all the different ways that this impacts our life today. Here's my old buddy, the master of the Speaker of Commons. He is in Britain, and he likes to say, "Order," and he works for Britain's legislative branch. Now, here again is the challenge. Why is the legislative branch sometimes called Congress and sometimes called the House of Representatives and Senate? I don't know. That's not fair to you. You have to learn 1, 2, 3 different terms for one group of people. That's hard. But it's a group of people who are elected to make the laws. This is a group of citizens who make the laws. They're called the legislative branch. They're also called Congress. They're also called the House of Representatives. The executive branch can make no laws. The president, the vice president, they can't make laws. Technically, what they do is they enforce the laws. They make sure the laws are followed. Now, during President Trump's presidency, he has taken the laws about what to do with people when they arrive in the United States, especially if they're asking for a safe place to stay because their home country isn't safe. There's a law that says the president should check on those people to make sure that they are welcome in this country, that they have a good reason to be here, etc. The way that President Trump, if you remember, chose to enforce those laws was to separate children from families. He said that that was the best way to follow the law that was created. Now, a judge said, actually, that's really not fair to those kids and those families, so you can't do that. But that's an example. President Trump didn't make that law. There was a law that said that, but he chose to enforce it in a way that separated families. And a judge said that's not a fair way to do it. But the executive branch enforces the laws or makes sure they're followed. The legislative branch makes the laws. And this is just a brief overview of some of the basic vocabulary on how our government runs or how to describe our government. Now you'll take the learning check or the notes check and prove that you understand those basic terms.